And greetings, welcome to the Divine Line. I guess we completely forgot to turn the monitor on in here since I have no idea what's going on there. It's completely black, so I hope we're on. I can't tell, but what? Well, it's not on in here. It's see that it's just completely
That's incorrect.
black. It's incorrect.
That is incorrect.
So it is on, but it's incorrect that it's
Right.
off.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's coming back now.
It's coming on now.
There you go.
Good. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. I would have maybe noticed that if I wasn't rushing so much. I completely lost track of time as to when we were getting started today. Had a bunch of stuff going on and then looked at the clock and went, and barely got some stuff queued up. I mentioned over the weekend that I listened to the Ehrman-Bass debate, and we will get to that. I don't have the video here to... I'm arguing with myself as to whether it might be worth doing the audio note taker thing, which takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of my time to do. I don't have anybody that does that for me. It's all me, myself, and I. But Ehrman's presentation, I don't know how someone tells the exact same jokes at the exact same point in the exact same presentation, and still gets laughs. That's the scary part about it. Like when you're in a debate on the deity of Christ and saying, well, I'm really up against it here, obviously, because, the Bible's clearly against me, because as Jesus said in John 15, I am divine and you are the branches. And so there, Jesus is divine. So why am I arguing? It's really, how many times do you expect that joke to get a laugh? But anyway, sure, there's a lot of stuff that we've dealt with in the past in Ehrman's presentation. That doesn't mean it's not worth dealing with again, because as you know, Ehrman is the primary source for so much of the secular attack upon the Christian faith in the Western world today that it'd be worth going over. But what was particularly interesting was his accusation that to identify Jesus as Yahweh is to engage in the ancient heresy of Sabellianism, Patripassianism, or modalistic monarchianism. It's plainly obvious that Bart Ehrman did not pay a lot of attention in theology class. Whether it was at Moody or Wheaton or Princeton, I would love to quote Princeton professor Benjamin Breckinridge Warfield in refutation of Princeton graduate Bart Ehrman on that one. And I would love, the only way this will ever happen is if somebody out there wants to lay a big check out on the table just to make this happen. Because Ehrman doesn't have any interest in debating me again. When you post a debate going, well, this wasn't really my best debate. For someone who believes his own press as much as Bart Ehrman does, that's a huge admission. That's a huge admission. That someone went toe-to-toe with you and, anyway. But I would travel to Chapel Hill to debate Bart Ehrman on, because he said straightforward, and I didn't cue it up, but I can play it for you. Straightforward, straight, direct quotation. Jesus is not Yahweh for any of the New Testament writers. Now, what's funny here is, remember Shabir Ali at Pretoria University? Well, we can't accept this because obviously what Paul's saying here is that Jesus is Yahweh. And that's exactly right. He accused Bass of being a modalist, engaging in ancient heresy of Sabellianism, by assuming that Yahweh is unipersonal. So it would be an easy debate. I mean, he made the direct statement, Jesus is not Yahweh for any New Testament writer. I'll go to Chapel Hill and debate him in front of his own classes on that. But the only way that would ever happen, is if he walks out of the room with a big fat check in his pocket. Because otherwise, ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna happen. Well, he might do a donate to charity type thing, I suppose. But I'd love to do it because wow. But anyways, I'm thinking put that into audio note taker and deal with everything he says because there were some fascinating quotes that my Muslim friends need to hear before they quote Bart Ehrman because they think they understand what Bart Ehrman is saying and they don't. Bart Ehrman is a naturalist, and it's interesting. There's a guy on Twitter named Andrew Livingston. Well, I doubt that's his name, but I think, if I recall correctly, let me see if there's something here. Author, Muslim, vegetarian. That question about Islam you just asked me is one you can already find the answer to in photos and videos or my favorites page. Fort Smith. So that's all we've got for Andrew Livingston on Twitter. And for some reason, he started popping off. There's a young student that I tried to deal with, eventually had to block. You try to deal with someone, try to see if they have the ability to engage, to reflect, to learn, to go get past just, surface level mantra type argumentation. And eventually, after, a long time, gave evidence that couldn't pull that off. So I guess he jumped in on something along those lines. And we just had a lengthy conversation on Twitter about consistency. And his big argument against me is, you accuse all your opponents of being inconsistent. And I go, well, if consistency is what you're testing for in a debate, if the purpose of the debate is to test for consistency, if the reason you have two positions there is so they can examine each other to test for consistency, then your argument is exactly what again? and all I can do is keep repeating it. I mean, just as I was coming in here, literally a matter of moments ago, he found another place where I pointed out someone's inconsistency. And I said, excuse me, but if all I was doing was saying you're inconsistent and I couldn't document it, that would be one thing. But I demonstrate what the inconsistency is. How can you discuss truth without talking about consistency? But the whole thing now is, that's just all you do. That's all you do is you say that we're inconsistent. Well, if I document it, that means you're wrong, right? So evidently, clear thinking, not real big on the internet ever, really, these days. Political process, give that up. But especially amongst our some of our Muslim friends, where consistency is definitely short supply. Anyway, it would be awesome to force Bart Ehrman to be consistent here. One of the things that again, my Muslim friends, the connection point I was making here is they love to quote Bart Ehrman. And one of the things that I just mentioned in passing, this led to some of that conversation actually, is I did a long ride on Saturday so I could listen to the whole debate and do some other things. And I've got a long race coming up in a couple weeks in Tucson, so you got to get some saddle time. So I did a ride the same length and almost the exact same amount of climbing as we'll have down in Tucson for Alternative Tucson, which is this huge, massive race. It's enjoyable, but it's also scary. And it's only scary primarily because there are over 9,000 other people on the roads. Not in cars, on bikes. And not all of them are as skilled as you'd like them to be. And the only time I've ever had a bad crash, bike damaging, road rash giving crash, was in Altura, Tucson, and it was completely unavoidable. It was one of those things where two guys cross tires, falls on top of my front room. That's it. So I was out doing a 104-mile ride to train for that, and I listened to it, and I remember I was on Cave Creek Road the first time I went, oh my goodness, Bart Ehrman is channeling Ahmadiyya, because he's doing the where did Jesus say I am God thing. And I'm like, wow, here we go again. But when he says it, his challenge is different than D-Dot's. I mean, it sounds the same, but where he's coming from, completely different perspective. Because what he's saying is, yeah, all the gospel writers believe in the deity of Christ. Not in the exact same way. If you've read his book, John has the highest view and blah, 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 blah. And he has this really weird, we talked about his really weird theory about Jesus being an angel based on Galatians and stuff. And when his book came out, when was that? 2014? Early last year? Sounds about right. We talked about all that at that time. So it sounds the same, but he's actually coming at from a completely different perspective. So none of my Muslim friends want to say, well, yeah, sure. All the writers of the New Testament view Jesus as God. No, that's not their argument. Their argument is that developed much later and so on and so forth. Well, it depends on the Muslim you're talking to these days. I mean, there is no one Muslim argument anymore. And there couldn't be, because the Quran doesn't provide one Muslim argument. And the arguments that it does provide, a lot of the modern Muslims recognize aren't really good. Jesus used to eat food. His mother used to eat food. Therefore, he can't be God. At least I can respect that as a true Muslim argument, because it comes straight out of the Quran. That's obviously the argument that's being made by the author of the Quran. The problem is it just demonstrates such a complete ignorance of what we believe about the nature of the incarnation, the nature of Christ. And since there isn't any meaningful interaction at all with Christian theology on that level within the Quran, that's why I think a lot of modern Muslims try to avoid it. Mr. Livingston seems to be listening. As I expected, you repeated yourself and ignored my response. Not just error, you say double standards. From everyone? Mr. Livingston, you seem to be logic challenged. You seem to have a real problem understanding basics of logic. Let me try this one more time, because I have heard you, and your arguments are really, really bad, and I'll explain to you why. You cannot discuss truth claims without discussing consistency. Consistency is the mechanism by which you demonstrate the validity of truth claims. If you say something is true, and the next moment say something is false, you are being inconsistent if you're talking about the same thing in the same context in the same way. It is consistency over time and consistency through the course of an argument that demonstrates truth claims. Debates demonstrate whether the worldview you're presenting and the facts as you're interpreting them in the worldview are truthful, and the way you determine that is by their consistency. And so it is a given that if I am debating against a false worldview and against a false interpretation of the facts, that the other position will have to be inconsistent, and it is my job to demonstrate the inconsistency. There would be no reason for me to do a debate with someone whose position was more consistent than my own, because that would mean they're being more truthful than I am. So it is an absurdity, Mr. Livingston, to complain that I point out consistency and inconsistency, because that's what a debate is about. Now, you can have factual errors in your arguments, and I have often demonstrated when my Muslim opponents have presented factual errors. When Yusuf Ismail presented a factual error regarding Dan Wallace's book, I pointed it out. I didn't say you're being inconsistent. I said you're wrong. But there is a difference, Mr. Livingston, between having factual errors and being inconsistent in the interpretation of things that are not factual errors. So, when, to use an example that I pointed out just recently, Yusuf Ismail argues in Durban that the Gospels must be word-for-word reproductions of one another, and if there are any differences, then they're contradictory. And then, when we point out that the Quran narrates the same events using different words, and he says that doesn't matter, that is an inconsistency. It is an uneven scale. It is the use of double standards. It isn't an issue of what the facts of what Matthew and Mark said, or the facts of what Surah 7 and Surah 29 says. It's whether you're applying the same standards to the analysis of both. All of that, whether you have your facts straight and whether you're being consistent in your application and interpretation, is a part of the debate process. Okay? So you're demonstrating your utter irrationality because in the midst of my explaining that, you respond, you see? Double standards. Every opponent of yours is guilty of them. And I'm not to think the problem is with you. There's no reasoning with you, sir. You're not listening. You don't have any commitment to truthfulness or to logic or to rationality. There's no reasoning with someone like that. Yes, sir, you're right. I am absolutely committed to consistency. And if you can't hear the rest of it, you just demonstrated that you have no commitment to truth and no understanding of even how to recognize truth. So there you go. We've made it as clear as it can possibly be. And if you can't see it, then it's either a spiritual incapacity or a willful blindness on your part. Only two options. So anyway, back to Ehrman. When Muslim apologists use Bart Ehrman, they don't seem to understand that his objections are based upon what should be a completely different worldview of their own. So, on the one hand, they're willing to borrow the naturalistic worldview of Bart Ehrman, but they won't apply that to the Quran. Double standards again. I don't care whether you don't like hearing that. Facts are facts. Truth is truth. Law of non-contradiction remains law of non-contradiction. If you want to throw all that out, you might as well go join ISIS, because that's how they do debates too. And maybe there's a connection there. Who knows? But so Ehrman's whole point is, Paul believes in, Jesus is an exalted creature, and these gospel writers believe Jesus is God in a sense. That's fine. But Jesus could not have ever said these things. And when you ask, how do you know that? Then he has to default back to these naturalistic premises. And no naturalistic premises is ever going to give you a basis for believing that Jesus would make these claims of himself, because it's a supernatural thing, not a natural thing. He starts spinning in circles so hard that it's amazing to watch. It really is. But I'm not sure why I'm telling you all this stuff about Ehrman when we're not looking at Ehrman today, but I did mention it, and we will get to it. One of the things that I wanted to get to, I need to get back to, I do have a tendency to chase the shiny thing, not just during the program, but when you do a series of responses to people over time, things are going to come up. Things are going to develop. Things happen in culture. Wars take place. Books come out. And so that ends up getting in the way of finishing things up. So I want to get back to the Brownson response. I was pushing on that a little bit before we went to South Africa. I was preparing for the Codrington debate, which we did post. Yes? I've been seeing, yeah. It's on YouTube, and I'm seeing links to it. And in fact, a Turretin fan was saying in channel this morning he had listened to it for the second time and had found it to be helpful. And so I have had people asking about where the Yusuf Ismail debates are. I just got an email last week, I think, from the videographer on that. And this is strange because I need to ask Rudolph about this now I think about it. Because I thought we were getting that material, and in fact that the material was already ready to go. But I got an email asking for the PowerPoint keynote of my presentations for both evenings. So I'm not sure what that means. I don't know. We haven't gotten it yet. We'll see. We'll see. But we'll obviously put it up as soon as it's provided to us. But I was preparing for the Graham Codrington debate. That's where my focus was. And once that was done, then there were some other things to catch up on, and so we haven't pressed on with the Brownson thing as vigorously as we should have. Before I get back to that, I'll do the last portion of the program on that. But before I get back to that, there is some interesting stuff out here. Why did that go over there? Okay. I was sent a link. I don't have it in here, but to a book. I guess it's been out since May. No one told me about it, or if they did, I didn't see it. It's possible. By Robert Wilkins. What was it called? Let me see if I can bring it up here real quick in Amazon, because even the cover was amazing. Robert Wilkins. Let's just see what that comes up with. I didn't know Robert Wilkins. Obviously, I have. There we go. There it's called. It's Wilkin, singular. No S's on it. A Gospel of Doubt. The Legacy of John MacArthur's The Gospel According to Jesus by Robert N. Wilkin. And got a picture of a guy on his knees at an altar with his head buried in his hands. A Gospel of Doubt. Now, I'm not looking forward to this, but I bought it. And I will try to remember this evening to get it converted, because I've got another long ride this weekend, and I can't guarantee. I can't guarantee, because some of these books are depressing. Okay, that's just all there is to it. And there's this one hill I need to climb, and I don't need an extra burden on the way up. Sort of like, I'm already suffering. I need to suffer more. So it all depends. But I'll try to get to it as quick as I can. But I find this extremely troubling because I have pastorally seen the havoc that the Wilkin non-lordship salvation, cheap grace, ticket punched going to heaven, semi-gospel brings to the church. It's a horrible thing. And I've seen the impact it has upon Muslims. I've told you a story about the guy that I came up to me afterwards, after a presentation on Islam up in Boulder. And one of the misconceptions that we had to deal with was that all the Christians he had talked to were easy believists. And they were the Wilkin non-lordship type people. And so he's going, I just don't understand how you think you can, just tip your hat toward Jesus and then go live like you want. And we're all like, well, let's talk about that. And so one of their arguments is that if you don't have the ticket punched, no repentance, no self-examination, no holiness, without which no one ever seen God. Oh, never mind that. If you allow the natural tension that exists in the New Testament text to be there, well, then you don't have my absolute confidence. And I've talked to people who have a Bob Wilkin confidence as they sit there in their easy chair, watching TV, never go to church, don't give Christ a second thought in their life, but they've got their ticket punched and they've got confidence. Yeah, right. Okay. So I'm going to have to write to Phil Johnson and see if they're preparing a response. But a gospel of doubt, the legacy of John MacArthur's gospel according to Jesus. Oh, yeah, hey, that gives me hives. Something else gives me hives is 3 days ago, Dr. David Allen tweeted, book contract signed on Extent of the Atonement. Digital version out in May, print version out fall 2016. Publication estimate 850 pages. That sounds like a Robertson James book, yeah. No, there's a reason why it has to be that long, and everybody knows what that reason is. I don't think I have a copy in here. But From Heaven He Came and Sought Her was about 780 pages, something like that. It's a big book. And I didn't count this. I didn't go and go looking for this. But it seemed to me that in that book, the person who got the most mentions as having blown the argument was David Allen. And so I think he's been hurting about that ever since that came out. And so this is his counterblast. This is the way for the anti-reformed Southern Baptist to go, well, here's ours. Ours is even bigger, and ha ha ha. And I just keep thinking about the fact that only 7 years ago, at the John 3:16 conference, 2008, here's this guy. Now remember, David Allen, I have refuted thoroughly on his accusations against me. Took a whole program to go through his footnote in his book and what he's said and just point by point take it apart. No response. Nothing. Just he's just going to let it hang there. He's going to let the false accusations stand, and I just let you make the decision as to what that means. Standing challenge to debate there in Dallas. I mean, it'd be good. You've got to put a book out on it. Why not debate it, right? But that won't happen. So we've gone through all this stuff, but in 2008, it was painfully obvious that he was new to this subject. He's even made the statement that he began studying the subject at that time. And we pointed out that he was dependent for his sources upon students. This was a new area to him. And now, so desperate is this realm of Southern Baptist anti-reformed Arminianism that he's become their go-to guy in that relatively short period of time. So there you go. Coming out next year from David Allen, book on the extent of the atonement. That's exciting. Very, very, very exciting. And suppose if it's out on Kindle, I can't imagine doing 850 pages of that, but it's the price we pay. All right, now, for the last half of the program here, why are we doing this? To remind everybody again, because James Brownson's book, see, still have it here. Hasn't been that long. There are two go-to books. The original go-to book for a long time was John Boswell's Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality. Boswell was himself homosexual, died of AIDS. What? Yeah. This is... Well, why don't you have it right out here where it's easy to see? I don't know. Oh, there we go. Print's getting really small. 1980, University of Chicago. So for a long time, for the liberal folks, Boswell. Now, Boswell's stuff has been shredded. It's just bad, grossly imbalanced use of sources, just not good stuff. But there you go. There's Boswell. Boswell being liberal really wasn't what a lot of the Matthew Vines types were looking for. And so I think this is 2013. So this came out after Matthew Vines' viral video. And so Vines' arguments are pretty much more Scanzonian, Mollenkott, Scroggs, Boswell, standard revisionist stuff. And then after his video comes out, this book comes out, Bible, Gender, Sexuality, Reframing the Church's Debate on Same-Sex Relationships. And as I pointed out, Brownson's son came out as a homosexual. All of a sudden, the position that he had as a theologian before now changes. Remember, David Gushee, sister came out as a homosexual. His position changes. I think it is perfectly appropriate to point out when people change their positions, when a family member or someone close to them all of a sudden decides that they are homosexual and yet they want to be accepted by God as a homosexual. They want to demand that Christianity change its morals and ethics to fit their personal feelings. And you all go, okay, we'll find a way to do that. So Brownson's book comes out, and Brownson's book becomes the Bible of the gay affirming, the conservative gay affirming, not the Daniel Kirks, the fellow that Dr. Gagnon debated, not those kinds of folks, but the ones who want to try to maintain some claim of evangelical credibility, conservatism. I still believe the Bible is the Word of God type stuff, because it's pretty hard when you take positions like Daniel Kirk and say we need to learn to think differently than Jesus and the apostles did. You can talk about the Bible being the Word of God all you want. What do you mean by that? It doesn't really have much meaning anymore. And so Brownson, liberal reformed, but much more conservative than some others, has become the go-to guy. If you recall, because we'll put this all together with what we've already done before. If you recall, we had looked at Romans 1. And we've done this many times. And if you recall in the Codrington debate, I did it again. I walked through Romans 1. It's not that difficult to do. I mean, sometimes people come and do, I just wish I could do what you do and do that. I've been dealing with this passage for decades. And eventually, it shouldn't take much in the way of preparation if you've been especially if you've been dealing with the passage not just in response to one group, but in response to challenges from all across the spectrum in every different direction. You want to know when you can really get confidence in handling of a particular text is when you've had to present that text in opposition to really almost a 360-degree range of objections. If you've only, for example, defended, well, good example, Isaiah 43:10. You know, for most of my young life, Isaiah 43:10 was a text you quote to Mormons. And the only real relevance was the last phrases. Before me there was no God formed, there should be none after me. Then all of a sudden you start dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is where they get their name. And then all of a sudden you start dealing with the I am sayings of Jesus, and whoa, it's right there. And so when my Muslim opponent a couple weeks ago in Durban says, Isaiah 43:10 is my favorite verse in the Bible, it's like, strike up the band, here we go, because you've now dealt with this text from numerous different directions. And that casts different light upon the text. That helps a lot. So we went through Romans 1. We walked through it. We saw the creation narrative behind the entirety of Romans 1. And by the way, may I say that having to deal with the radical, truly radical, way beyond Brownson. Brownson doesn't even mention this in this presentation anyways. And I don't think he did in Bible Gender Sexuality, but I need to look. The radical theory that Graham Codrington has put forward, that Romans 1:18 through 32 is actually not Paul speaking, but Paul representing a common Jewish understanding that he then argues against for the rest of the book of Romans. Even having to think that through has greatly enriched my understanding of that text and its place in Romans, because I submit to you that to take that perspective turns the entirety of Romans 1 through 3:19 on its head. It destroys the argument of Paul. It destroys it. And so once you've heard an argument like that, then it strengthens the foundations you have in seeing how this is related to that, this is related to that, so on and so forth. So in going through Romans 1, we pointed out the creation narrative that is found there, in opposition, interestingly enough, to the Book of Wisdom in the Apocrypha, which sometime we're going to have to, it'd be an interesting program someday, just to throw that up on the screen and walk through 3 or 4 chapters of wisdom. Because I would imagine the vast majority of this audience has never read the book. Vast majority of Protestants have never read the Apocrypha at all. And that particular book, we were discussing in channel just this morning. I forget who I was talking with. May have been Dort GA or somebody. I'm trying to remember. I think it was. There are a number of very clear, very obvious, not to be rejected, not to be criticized connections between Paul in Romans and wisdom. There's no question about it. I wonder if I have it. Here. Did I? I'm not sure if I installed this. I had to actually, I don't know if you saw, I had to buy a module in Accordance recently to get a modern translation, semi-modern translation of wisdom that would match up with my Septuagint in Accordance. And I'm trying to remember which one that was. I thought it was the NRSV. Yep. It was. There it is. All right. I got that. And wisdom. Yep. Okay. Yeah, Dort and Channel just mentioned. I actually hadn't gone to the link, Dort, that you provided, but this is I'm pretty certain that this was the text that you mentioned. Here's Wisdom 15:7. This is in the Apocrypha, Wisdom 15:7. A potter needs the soft earth and laboriously molds each vessel for our service, fashioning out of the same clay both the vessels that serve clean uses and those for contrary uses, making all alike. But which shall be the use of each of them, the worker in clay decides. Sound familiar? Heard that one someplace before? Yeah. Now, are there pottery, the potter and the clay things in the Old Testament? Sure are. But did you catch that? Both the vessels that serve clean uses and those for contrary uses, making all alike. That's not in Jeremiah, but it is in Romans 9. Now, you might go, I'm not sure I like when Paul makes allusion to a non-canonical book. Well, he makes lots of allusions to non-canonical books. He quotes non-canonical books. But here's the point. He never identified. Every one of his hearers would have known what he was referring to. But he never identifies this book of Scripture. Had every opportunity in the world. This would have been the perfect time to go, as the Scripture says, and then quote directly from wisdom. But he doesn't do that. Doesn't do that. Because he knows, while it's a book that he can make reference to, he can make allusion to, because his hearers will understand what it is, he's not citing his Scripture because he knows it isn't Scripture. So for the Roman Catholic, who's constantly doing the Luther took out these books from the Bible thing, this is a problem. This is a major problem there. But there definitely seems. And of course, if you were to look at where's my I thought I had one in here. There might be here if I can do this without putting glasses on. Yep, there it is. If you look at your Nestle-Aland text, I was looking for my UBS text because it tends to have more of these references. I'll have to drag it UBS in here. But for those of you who use, boy, are we really wandering around the planet today? Sorry. Especially those of you that could be trying to follow the Brownson response, going, "Man, that was a weird aspect of it. This is strange." Yeah. If you use the Nestle-Aland text, and I don't know if let me see here if I can show this to you, because I'm not sure that I have the sigla in this electronic version. Yeah, I don't. There's probably notes, probably NA28 notes someplace that I could pull up that might have all this in it, but I'm not seeing it in the midst of all the bazillions of things I've got here. So anyway, if you use the Nestle-Aland text, you will see next to 921 two references in the column. One is JR 18:6, that's Jeremiah 18, and then SAP 15:7, sapienta, wisdom. And so that may not suggest to a lot of people, because remember, they're not necessarily using the English titles of books, but the cross-reference is provided right there in the Nestle-Aland text. And again, just because there's a cross-reference does not mean, you've got to be really careful. No one is denying for a second that the New Testament writers were ignorant of all these other books that existed out there. No one's saying for a second they didn't make allusions to them. That doesn't make them canonical. Any more than quoting the pagan Greek philosophers makes them canonical. Or if the New Testament was being written today, if someone were to quote Pilgrim's Progress, that doesn't make it canonical. For some Reformed Baptists, it's a little close there. I'm not sure. It's a little scary at times. But anyway, so we went through Romans 1. We talked about its deep connection to the creation narrative. We talked about what its Old Testament background was. We talked about the consistent reading of the text where you can follow the line of thought all the way through the creator, the creation, exchanging. You saw in the Codrington debate how, Graham is a professional speaker. When did he look the least professional and most nervous? It was during cross-examination, when I am specifically challenging him to deal with the text. Did he have answers? He did. Were they consistent answers? No, they were not. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Livingston. I mentioned consistent again. But that's what debates are actually all about. Then I mentioned to you what you're going to see in Brownson and what he does in his book is he has to try to break every connection between Romans 1 and the creation narratives he possibly can, because if that's the background, then what natural means? The woman abandoning the natural use. The man abandoning the natural use of the woman. Very clear. He has found a way in his thinking to open the door to the acceptance of homosexuality within the church. Part and parcel of how to do that is to shift the context of Romans 1. And isn't that, they all have to do that. Every revisionist argument is going to fundamentally require an abandonment of any meaningful textual reading of Romans that is going to consistently flow from beginning to end. Or, more likely, is going to assert there is no such reading. And therefore, we've got this possibility, we've got that possibility. You got to understand, for most revisionists, the idea is to inculcate doubt. If you can get enough doubt in there, then if you doubt your sources, you're not going to be able to take a strong stand. And that's how the liberal denominations have been undercut from the inside, is they had already adopted a bibliology, a doctrine of the Bible, a doctrine of Scripture that was fundamentally decrepit and could not stand up to the challenge of this kind of movement. So I actually went back a little bit in what Brownson was saying, because the last thing we stopped with was, okay, we can't look to the Old Testament for Romans 1. What can we look to? What is its context? I think I went far enough back that he'll actually introduce his answer here, I hope. You have it ready to go? Let's see.
Now, trying to unpack what nature means in Paul and in Stoicism. And, those of you who have read my blog...
Okay, I guess didn't go far enough back, but there it is. He is going to say that the interpretive grid that we must adopt to accurately interpret Romans 1, specifically 26 and 27, is Stoicism. You need to understand Stoic philosophy, and that Paul is speaking from a Stoic perspective here. Now, again, a lot of conservative Bible-believing Christians have never been faced with the issue of Greek philosophy, with its role in the development of Christian understanding or anything like that. And so as a result, most of the time when people start going, well, Augustine was a Neoplatonist, and you just want to go, is that a person with a lot of metal in his portfolio? What is that? Most of us are not comfortable defining the difference between Platonism and Neoplatonism, and we don't want to see the term Epicurean on a test. And Stoic, most of us sort of go, grin and bear it. Is that sort of what the Stoics? We're just not comfortable with these things because we don't spend time studying this stuff. And of course, scholars sit around and argue about the fine points of exactly, which Stoic philosopher is the quintessential representative of the Stoics. And didn't Stoicism develop over time? You've got all this stuff and people that sit around smoke-filled rooms and argue about these things. So once someone makes an argument like that, once someone starts throwing terms like that out, it tends to stop the conversation because we're like, okay, well, if you say so. But it is pretty amazing to me that what's being said here is that Paul's entire argument to the church at Rome, and Rich was saying somebody had called and was arguing that Romans is only for the Romans. And it's so painfully obvious, so painfully clear, that the reason that Paul goes into the depth of detail and the organization of his presentation of the gospel he does in writing to Rome is because he recognizes the function of Rome in the ancient world as the hub. Plant a solid church at places like Ephesus, plant a solid church at places like Rome. These are central major cities. The old saying, quite true, all roads lead to Rome, and hence back out of Rome. And therefore, the point is, what is communicated to those major cities is meant to have a Catholic, in the ancient meaning of that term, universal message, rather than one that's focused upon a particular place or a particular time. The idea that anything in Romans is just for the Romans is just silly. It just shows a massive ignorance of the book itself and the very form of its argument.
Well, the interesting thing in the conversation was, I don't think if it weren't for Romans 9, the guy would ever make that argument. Absolutely. It was just, I don't like that part of it, so I need to find some way to overcome it.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? I mean, look at what people do to the Gospel of John for the exact same reason. They love the universal sections of the Gospel of John until you get to specific sections, and then that's not really about us. So, John 6, John 3 is about the whole world. John 6, and then you come up with all the hyper-dispensational, before the cross, blah, blah, blah stuff. Yeah, that's how it works. Anyway, so the interpretive grid that Dr. Brownson says that we must apply to Romans chapter 1 is that of Stoicism. That's how we're supposed to do it. Okay.
Well, I put a post on this about, the classic image of the blind men and the elephant. And this is, the debates about nature, I think, are one of these classic examples where you have three different understandings of nature. They're all saying this is what Paul means. They're all, in a sense, right. They can find evidence for their particular understanding of nature both within Paul's use of this word elsewhere and in the larger Stoic discourse. So they all can find text to back up what they're doing, but they're all only getting a piece of it. All right? So I want to explore these three pieces of nature and then talk about how we might combine them. The three pieces, of course, are nature as one's own disposition. That is, to act in accordance with nature is to do what comes naturally to you. Okay? To act in accordance with your own disposition. Second definition is nature as communal well-being. Nature as what everybody knows. All right? To say something ain't natural means everybody knows that you shouldn't do it that way. Okay? And then thirdly, nature as the biological and material universe. So nature then means living in harmony with the larger world around us.
Now, what isn't provided there would be the only meaning that would make sense within the discourse that Paul is presenting concerning the Creator and the creation and the twisting of the relationship and the exchanging of truth for a lie. You'll notice, how can that not be the first and the foremost in a list of meanings of the word nature when we're talking about its use in this context? You have to break Romans chapter 1 up and ignore that this is an illustration of the twisting of the creator-creation relationship, the exchange of truth for the lie, and the being given over by God in that rebellion that the creation is engaged in. So that's the difference between, I need to find an interpretation, I'm going to build a system and bring it in so that I can deal with this narrow part of the context. Anybody can do that. Walking through the text, following its meaning, listening to what these things have to say, but always giving priority to what the text itself is communicating, that's what takes a whole lot more work. That's what takes a whole lot more work. And unfortunately, that's where Dr. Brownson's thesis is going to fall apart. But it took me so long to get back into the into the topic there. We didn't get very, very far. I apologize for that. But hopefully it was useful for you anyway. And we will continue with our discussion of these things and other important elements, handling the word aright and defending the faith in this modern day. Thanks for watching Dividing Line. We'll see you, Lord willing, on Thursday. God bless.